"Stop right there, you. Hands where I can see 'em, now." Officer Mike Donovan barked, his flashlight beam slicing through the Detroit night like a knife, pinning Loretta Jenkins against the cracked sidewalk. She froze mid-step, her nurse's scrubs still stained from a 12-hour shift saving lives at the community hospital. But to Donovan, she was just another black woman walking home too late, too alone, too suspicious, in a neighborhood where folks like her weren't supposed to linger. Loretta's jaw clenched tight, her fists balling at her sides as the beam blinded her. "Officer, I'm just heading home after work. I haven't done anything wrong." Her voice stayed steady, honed from years of calming panicked patience. But inside, a storm raged, fury at the injustice that turned her daily commute into a battlefield. Donovan stepped closer, his boots thudding like judgments. "Work? Yeah, right. People like you always got a story. Empty your pockets. Slow." He cut her off before she could respond, his tone dripping with that familiar disdain, the kind that said her skin color was reason enough for suspicion. No questions, no due process, just raw power flexing. In the shadows of Motor City, where racial profiling wasn't news, it was routine for women like Loretta, pushing 50 and still fighting the same old demons from the '67 riots her parents survived. She complied, pulling out her hospital ID with trembling hands, but he snatched it away. "This could be fake. I've seen plenty of your kind pulling scams." His words hit like punches, each one echoing the microaggressions she'd endured. The store clerks trailing her aisles, the neighbors whispering when she unloaded groceries. Loretta's teeth ground together, pain shooting through her jaw, but she held back, the retort burning in her throat. Fighting back now could escalate, could end in cuffs or worse. She'd seen the videos, heard the stories from her patients. Black men and women battered by the system she quietly battled every day in the ER. Donovan rifled through her bag, tossing her wallet and keys onto the pavement without a care. "What's this? Looks like junk to me," he smirked, kicking her thermos aside, hot coffee spilling like her dignity. Loretta's eyes narrowed, her breath quickening as rage coiled in her chest. This wasn't her first rodeo. Last month he'd stopped her twice, each time probing deeper, questioning her presence in her own damn city. "Officer, please. I'm a nurse. I just saved a kid's life tonight. Can I go?" He laughed, a sharp bark that cut the air. "Saved a life? Save it for someone who cares. Turn around, face the wall." No pause, no mercy. He spun her roughly, patting her down with unnecessary force, his hands lingering just enough to humiliate. Loretta's cheeks burned, humiliation mixing with the fury bubbling up. She thought of her daughter Maya, waiting at home, worrying every time Mom was late. This was the America she knew, where hard work didn't shield you from hatred, where being black meant proving your worth every step. But Donovan wasn't done. "You people think you can wander these streets like you own 'em, not on my watch." The slur hung unspoken, but clear in his glare. Loretta's nails dug into her palms, drawing blood as she swallowed the scream. She'd patched up victims of this exact bias, gunshot wounds from routine stops gone wrong. Her mind flashed to the protests she'd joined quietly after George Floyd, the chants of Black Lives Matter that felt like pleas in the wind. Yet here she was, reduced to a suspect for existing. He shoved her ID back. "Get out of here before I change my mind." Loretta gathered her things, her knees shaking, but her spine straight as steel. Walking away, she felt his eyes boring into her back, a predator's stare. This wasn't just one bad night, it was the grind, the daily erosion of her spirit in a city that claimed progress but delivered pain. By the time she reached her door, exhaustion hit like a wave, but so did resolve, simmering, ready to ignite. "Get inside, Mom, before he comes back!" Maya's voice crackled through the phone, sharp with panic, as Loretta Jenkins fumbled her keys at her apartment door, her hands still trembling from Officer Donovan's ambush. The Detroit night pressed heavy, the streetlights flickering like her fading patience. She locked the door behind her, leaning against it, her chest heaving as if she'd run a marathon. Her teeth clamped so hard her jaw ached, a physical echo of the rage she'd buried under years of keeping calm to survive. This wasn't just one cop's power trip. It was the weight of every sideways glance, every whispered slur, every time she'd been followed in a store or questioned for existing while black. Loretta slid to the floor, her nurse's scrubs crumpled, her hospital ID clutched like a lifeline. She'd just spent 12 hours stitching wounds, calming terrified patients during a packed ER shift. Hero's work, saving lives through the chaos of COVID's aftermath. Yet out there, she was nothing but a target. Her mind churned with memories. The elderly black patient she'd held as he sobbed about his own routine stop decades ago. The young mother she'd comforted whose son was in jail for looking wrong. Her fists tightened, nails biting into her palms, the sting grounding her against a flood of fury and shame. She wanted to scream, to march back out and demand respect, but she knew better. Knew how quickly a raised voice could turn into cuffs or a bullet for someone like her. "Mom, you okay?" Maya's voice broke through again, now on speaker, her worry slicing deeper than Donovan's insults. Loretta forced a smile, though her daughter couldn't see it. "I'm fine, baby, just tired." A lie, but one she'd perfected. She couldn't let Maya, her fierce 28-year-old teacher, carry this burden too. Maya had her own battles, parents at school doubting her credentials, kids mimicking the same biases they saw on the news. "He had no right, Mom," Maya snapped, her voice rising. "You save lives every day. You're a damn hero, and he treated you like trash." The words hit hard, stirring the embers of Loretta's anger. Maya was right, but what could she do? Report him? Risk retaliation? The system wasn't built for people like them. It was built to break them. Loretta's eyes fell to a framed photo on the coffee table, her younger self in scrubs, smiling after her first big save, a car crash victim pulled back from the brink. She'd been so proud then, believing hard work could outshine hate. Now, at 50, that hope felt like a cruel joke. Her heart pounded as she recalled Donovan's sneer. "People like you?" The phrase echoed every time she'd been dismissed, at the grocery store, at the bank, even at the hospital, where a white doctor once assumed she was a janitor. Her breath hitched, a sob threatening, but she crushed it down. Crying wouldn't undo the humiliation, or the fear that next time Donovan might not let her walk away. She stood, pacing her small living room, her steps sharp and deliberate. Inside, a war raged. Part of her wanted to shrink, to stay quiet and safe like she'd done for years. But another part, the part that had faced down death in the ER, that had marched silently after Trayvon Martin, burned for justice. Maya's voice cut in again. "Mom, we can't keep letting this slide. You're worth more than this." Loretta stopped, her gaze locking on her reflection in a cracked mirror. The woman staring back wasn't just a tired nurse. She was a survivor, a fighter who'd saved lives others had written off. Her jaw set, resolve hardening like steel. She wouldn't let Donovan's hatred define her. Not anymore. Clutching her hospital ID, Loretta's fingers brushed an old envelope tucked in her bag. A thank you letter from a hospital, tied to a life she'd saved long ago. It was a spark, a reminder of her power. She wasn't done fighting. Not yet. "You're under arrest, Jenkins! Don't make this harder than it needs to be!" Officer Mike Donovan's voice thundered through the Detroit night, his handcuffs glinting as he yanked Loretta Jenkins' arms behind her back. The cold metal bit into her wrists, her nurse's scrubs twisting as he shoved her against his patrol car. It was the same street she'd walked home on for years, now a stage for her public humiliation. Her heart slammed against her ribs, not from fear, but from a white-hot fury that surged like a dam breaking. This wasn't just another stop. It was a line crossed, a deliberate act to crush her spirit. Donovan's accusation of causing a disturbance was flimsy, built on nothing but her pausing to catch her breath after a grueling ER shift. The real crime being black in his territory. The patrol car's red and blue lights flashed, drawing neighbors' eyes to their windows, their whispers cutting deeper than the cuffs. "What'd she do now?" one muttered, unaware of Loretta's decades saving lives like theirs. Her teeth ground so hard her jaw throbbed, memories of every slight, every sneer from Donovan flooding back. The time he'd tossed her ID like garbage, the nights he'd trailed her home, his taunts about her kind always lurking. This was no mistake. It was a power play, a message that her existence, her blackness, was a threat he'd snuff out. Her knees buckled as he pushed her into the car, but her spine stayed rigid, defiance burning through the shame. She thought of Maya, her daughter, who'd begged her to fight back. This time, she would. At the precinct, Donovan's smirk grew as he booked her, his pen scratching out lies on the report. Resisting arrest, huh? That'll stick. He leaned close, his breath hot with contempt. You should have stayed quiet, Jenkins. Loretta's fists clenched behind her, nails carving crescents into her palms. She wanted to shout her truth, a nurse who'd stitched up gunshot victims, held dying hands during COVID, saved kids from overdoses. But words would be weapons turned against her. She'd seen it before, black voices twisted, silenced, or worse, used as excuses for brutality. Her pulse raced, but her eyes locked on his, steady as steel. I want a lawyer, she said, her voice low, slicing through his bravado like a scalpel. Donovan flinched, just for a second, but it was enough. She'd struck a nerve. The holding cell's clang echoed as she was locked in, the cold bench biting through her scrubs. Alone, her mind churned. This wasn't just about her. It was about every black woman, stopped, searched, shamed for existing. Her thoughts flashed to her patients, to the protests she'd joined after George Floyd, to the stories of mothers like her fearing for their kids. Her chest tightened, rage mixing with a bone-deep exhaustion. But then her fingers brushed the crumpled envelope in her pocket. A thank you letter from a hospital tied to a life she'd saved 15 years ago in a car crash. She hadn't thought about it in years, but now it felt like a lifeline, a reminder of the power she held, the lives she'd changed despite the hate. Loretta stood, her breath steadying, her resolve crystallizing. No more, she whispered to the empty cell. She wouldn't let Donovan's cuffs or his city's broken system define her worth. She'd fight, not with screams but with proof, with the truth of who she was. Her mind raced to the courtroom ahead, to the lawyer she'd demand, to the letter that held a secret even she hadn't fully grasped. As the cell door loomed, her eyes burned with purpose, a fire ready to blaze. She wasn't just a nurse, not just a victim. She was Loretta Jenkins. And her story was far from over. Release her. Bail's posted, Jenkins. Get out before I drag you myself. The precinct's door slammed open, a burly guard shoving Loretta Jenkins into the harsh Detroit morning light, her wrists raw from the cuffs that had bound her overnight. She staggered forward, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled and stained, but her eyes blazed with unyielding fire. No more hiding in the shadows of fear. This arrest had cracked her silence wide open. She clutched her belongings, including that crumpled envelope from her pocket, its edges worn like her resolve. Maya waited outside, her car idling, her face a storm of relief and rage. Mom, we're fighting this, no backing down. Loretta nodded, her jaw set tight as they sped toward the federal courthouse. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was rebirth, stepping into an arena where her hidden strength could finally strike back. The courthouse loomed, its marble steps, a battlefield far from the ER chaos she knew. But Loretta climbed them with the steady gait of a woman who'd stared down death daily. Inside, the air hummed with tension, lawyers barking orders, clerks shuffling papers, defendants shuffling in chains. She signed in for her arraignment hearing, her fingers steady despite the pulse hammering in her veins. Loretta Jenkins, resisting arrest and disorderly conduct, the clerk droned, barely glancing up. Loretta's fists balled at her sides, her nails digging in again, but she held her tongue. This was her new world, not saving lives with sutures, but reclaiming her own with words and evidence. She took her seat in the packed courtroom, her mind racing through the plan she'd hatched in that cell. Expose Donovan's lies, demand justice, reveal the truth she'd buried for too long. As the judge called her case, Loretta stood, her voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. Your Honor, I'm innocent. I'm a nurse at Detroit Community Hospital. I've dedicated my life to healing this city. The words poured out, not a plea, but a declaration, her chin lifted high. The prosecutor snorted, interrupting mid-sentence. "Save the speech, Ms. Jenkins. Evidence shows you resisted a lawful stop." But Loretta didn't flinch, her eyes locked on the bench, her breath even as fury simmered beneath. She pulled out her hospital records from her bag, logs of shifts where she'd pulled double duty during COVID, saving cops, kids, and elders alike. "This is who I am," she said, sliding them forward. The courtroom shifted, whispers rippling as the judge scanned the pages. For the first time in years, Loretta felt the weight lifting, not fully, but enough to breathe. Flashbacks hit her hard as she waited for the ruling. Her early days as a head nurse, leading teams through brutal nights. Her quiet donations to community funds that patched up the wounds of inequality. She'd hidden it all, choosing humility over headlines after her husband's death left her raising Maya alone. But now, in this sterile hall of justice, those secrets stirred. Her hand brushed the envelope again, the thank you letter from a blood donation drive 15 years back, when she'd given plasma that pulled a stranger from the brink after a wreck on I-75. She hadn't chased recognition. She'd just acted, like always. Her heart pounded as the judge banged the gavel for a recess, her mind piecing together how that act might connect to her fight now. Donovan's shadow still loomed, but Loretta's steps echoed with purpose as she paced the hallway, Maya at her side. "You're not just a nurse, Mom. You're a force." Loretta's lips tightened into a grim smile, her resolve hardening. This courtroom wasn't the end. It was the gateway to unveiling the power she'd kept chained. She re-entered the chamber, ready for the next blow, her posture unbowed. Whispers from other defendants fueled her, black faces nodding in solidarity, knowing her story mirrored theirs. Loretta's fingers traced the envelope's seal, a quiet vow forming. No more Them Lang. The gavel fell again, pulling her forward, her secrets on the cusp of eruption. "Order in my court, Jenkins. Speak when spoken to." Judge William Carter's gavel cracked like a gunshot, silencing Loretta Jenkins mid-sentence as she stood in the Detroit Federal Courthouse, her nurse's scrubs a stark contrast to the suits around her. Her voice had just begun to rise, recounting Officer Donovan's baseless arrest, when Carter's bark cut her off, his gray eyes narrowing from the bench. Loretta's fists clenched, her knuckles whitening as the sting of interruption fueled the fire in her chest. She'd faced down chaos in the ER, gunshot victims, screaming families. But this courtroom felt like a different beast, one that could crush her with a single ruling, yet she stood tall, her gaze locked on Carter, refusing to shrink under his glare. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every black woman who'd been silenced, profiled, dismissed. Carter leaned forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "You claim innocence, Ms. Jenkins, but the report says you resisted. Explain. Fast." The prosecutor smirked, tossing Donovan's falsified report onto the evidence table like a trump card. Loretta's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding as she forced her words to stay steady. "Your Honor, I'm a nurse. I was walking home after saving lives. Officer Donovan targeted me for no reason because of my skin." The courtroom buzzed, a ripple of gasps from black spectators who knew that truth too well. Carter's brow furrowed, but he waved her off. "Enough. Hand over any proof, or sit down." His tone was ice, but something flickered in his eyes, a crack in his armor. Loretta couldn't yet read. She slid her hospital records across, her fingers brushing the worn envelope in her pocket. The thank you letter from a blood donation 15 years ago. Her heart pounded as she spoke, each word a strike against the lies. "These logs show my shifts. 12 hours saving people, including cops like Donovan. I didn't resist. I complied, and he still cuffed me." The prosecutor jumped in, cutting her off with a sneer. "Irrelevant. Your job doesn't excuse breaking the law." Loretta's nails dug into her palms, rage surging at the dismissal, but she caught Carter's gaze shift to the envelope peeking from her bag. He paused, his hand hovering over the gavel, his face paling, as if struck by lightning. "Wait," Carter snapped, his voice low but urgent. "That envelope, what is it?" Loretta froze, her pulse racing. She pulled it out, her hands trembling as she opened it, revealing a faded hospital letterhead. "It's from 2010, Your Honor. A thank you for donating blood that saved a crash victim on I-75. Carter's eyes locked on the paper, his breath catching. He snatched it, his fingers shaking as he read the date, the hospital's seal, the donor's name. Loretta Jenkins. His voice dropped to a whisper. You're the one. The courtroom fell dead silent, every eye on the judge as he stared at Loretta, like she'd risen from the grave. Carter leaned back, his face a storm of shock and shame. 15 years ago, I was that victim. My car flipped on the freeway. Doctors said I'd have died without that blood. Your blood. His words hit like a bomb, gasps erupting from the gallery. Loretta's knees buckled, but she gripped the table, her eyes wide. She'd never known who she'd saved. She'd just acted like always. Now, standing before the man whose life she'd held in her veins, her chest swelled, not with pride, but with power. Carter's voice cracked. You gave me a second chance, and I almost threw you to the wolves. The prosecutor stammered, but Carter silenced him with a glare. This changes everything. Loretta's breath steadied, her resolve now a blazing torch. The man who'd nearly condemned her was her ally, bound by a debt he could never repay. As Carter called a recess, his eyes lingered on her, a promise unspoken. Loretta clutched the letter, her heart thundering with purpose. She wasn't just a nurse now. She was a force, ready to rewrite this story. Silence in my courtroom! Now! Judge William Carter's gavel slammed, the sound ricocheting off the Detroit courthouse walls as Loretta Jenkins stood defiant, her nurse's scrubs a badge of battles fought. The air crackled with tension, the prosecutor's smirk faltering after Carter's blood had saved his life 15 years ago. Her fists unclenched, but her eyes burned, locked on the judge, who now looked at her not as a defendant but as a debt unpaid. The gallery buzzed, black spectators leaning forward, their whispers a chorus of hope and fury. Loretta's heart thundered. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom anymore. She was tearing down the walls that had caged her worth for decades. The prosecutor lunged, voice sharp as a whip. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. Her past doesn't erase her crimes. He waved Officer Donovan's report, a flimsy shield of lies. Loretta's teeth clenched, her jaw pulsing with the urge to shout him down, but she held steady, her voice slicing through. Crimes? I saved lives while Donovan hunted me for my skin. The words landed like a punch, the crowd erupting in murmurs. Carter's glare silenced the prosecutor mid-breath. Enough. Ms. Jenkins stepped forward. His tone was steel, but his eyes held something new. Respect, maybe even guilt. Loretta moved, her steps deliberate, each one shaking off years of being dismissed, profiled, erased. She reached into her bag, pulling out not just the hospital letter, but a folder. Her secret weapon. Your Honor, I'm not just a nurse, she said, her voice low, cutting through the room's hum. For 10 years I've run the Jenkins Health Fund, quietly paying for medical care in Detroit's poorest corners. Black, white, doesn't matter. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. She slapped the folder down, its pages spilling proof, receipts, thank you notes, records of kids getting insulin, elders getting surgeries. I hid it because I didn't need applause. But I won't hide anymore. Her words were knives, carving away the image of the troublemaker Donovan had painted. The prosecutor's face reddened, his argument crumbling like ash. Carter's eyes scanned the documents, his fingers trembling. You funded this? Anonymously? He asked, voice thick with awe. Loretta nodded, her chin high. I saved lives in the shadows, but I'm done letting people like Donovan bury me. The crowd roared, a woman in the back shouting, Tell it! A spark of the community's pent-up rage. Loretta's pulse surged, not with fear, but with power. She'd spent years dodging spotlights, but now she saw her truth as a weapon, one to dismantle the system that cuffed her for walking home. She turned to Carter, her voice rising, unwavering. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to demand change. My fund will now train your cops, teach them to see people, not skin. The courtroom froze, her words a thunderclap. She wasn't just clearing her name, she was rewriting the rules. Value isn't in badges or bank accounts, it's in what you do when no one's watching. Carter leaned back, his face a mix of shock and resolve, while the prosecutor stammered, "This is absurd." But Loretta cut him off with a glare, her presence commanding the room like she commanded the ER. This wasn't revenge. It was revolution, rooted in the real-world fight for police reform that every American over 50 had seen unfold. The gallery erupted in cheers, fists raised as Carter banged for order, his eyes never leaving Loretta. Her declaration wasn't just personal, it was a challenge to a city, a system, a nation. She stood, unbowed, the folder's papers fanning out like a battle flag. As the judge called for another recess, his nod to Loretta carried weight, a vow that her fight was his now. She gripped the folder, her heart a drumbeat of purpose, ready to face Donovan's lies head-on in the final clash. "Back off, Jenkins, or you'll regret it," Officer Mike Donovan's voice hissed through the phone, a venomous threat that cut through the Detroit dusk as Loretta Jenkins gripped her cell, her knuckles white with fury. Days after her courtroom stand, where she'd exposed her Jenkins Health Fund and demanded police reform, Donovan's retaliation hit like a freight train. He'd taken to social media, smearing her as a race-baiting fraud, his posts racking up likes from locals who'd never met her but ate up his lies. Her inbox flooded with hate, slurs, threats, calls to fire her from the hospital. Loretta's jaw locked tight, her teeth grinding as she read a message accusing her of faking her heroics. This wasn't just a cop's ego, it was a calculated strike to bury her truth before it could spread. She paced her cramped apartment, the walls closing in as her heart pounded. The sting of betrayal burned. Years saving lives in Detroit's ER, only to be branded a liar by a man who'd cuffed her for walking home. Her fingers trembled, brushing the hospital thank you letter from 15 years ago, now a symbol of her fight. Donovan's posts weren't just words. They were a noose, tightening around her job, her safety, her name. She thought of Maya, her daughter, who'd texted in a panic. "Mom, they're dragging you online. Don't let him win." Loretta's chest tightened, rage flaring at the thought of her daughter seeing this filth. She'd faced down death in the ER, but this was a different beast, a public lynching in the digital age, a tactic all too familiar to Black Americans who dared speak out. At the hospital, whispers followed her. Colleagues she'd saved from burnout now avoided her eyes, spooked by the rumors. A supervisor cornered her, voice low. "Loretta, this drama's bad for business. Lay low, or we're in trouble." Her fists balled, nails biting into her palms as she nodded but burned inside. Donovan's lies were a virus, infecting her world, and she knew he'd keep pushing, maybe he'd escalate to physical threats, like the stories she'd heard from patients harassed after protests. Her pulse raced, but surrender wasn't in her blood. She'd stitched up bullet wounds, held dying hands. She'd outlast this, too. Maya burst through the door, laptop in hand, her teacher's fire blazing. "Mom, we've got proof! Camera footage from the night he arrested you." She played a grainy video from a neighbor's security cam showing Donovan shoving Loretta, her compliance clear as day. Loretta's breath caught, a spark of hope cutting through the fury. Judge Willem Carter's face flashed in her mind, his shaken nod after learning she'd saved his life. She dialed her lawyer, a pro bono advocate who'd taken her case after the fund reveal. "File this now," she said, voice sharp as a scalpel. "We're hitting back." The lawyer moved fast, submitting the footage to Carter's court, while Maya rallied community allies, nurses, patients, even a local pastor who'd benefited from Loretta's fund. They flooded social media with counterposts. "Justice for Loretta. She saved us." The tide shifted, but Donovan doubled down, leaking a doctored report claiming Loretta attacked him. Her stomach churned, the audacity of his lies fueling her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every Black woman slandered, every voice drowned by power. Carter's office confirmed a hearing to review the new evidence, and Loretta's eyes narrowed, her heart a drumbeat of defiance. Donovan thought he could bury her, but he'd miscalculated. She was a force, forged in the ER's fire. As she prepared for court, Loretta stood before her mirror, the woman staring back, unbowed. The hate online still stung, but the footage, the community's roar, and Carter's debt to her were weapons now. She tucked the hospital letter into her pocket, a talisman of her worth. The next hearing wasn't just a defense, it was war, and she was ready to strike. Order, or I'll clear this courtroom. Judge William Carter's gavel slammed, its crack slicing through the charged air of the Detroit Federal Courthouse as Loretta Jenkins stood, her nurse's scrubs a battle-worn banner. The gallery buzzed with reporters, community activists, and black spectators, their eyes locked on her, fists clenched in solidarity. Officer Mike Donovan sat across the room, his smirk gone, replaced by a twitch of panic as Loretta's lawyer slapped the security footage onto the evidence table. Her heart pounded, not with fear but with a righteous fury that burned hotter than ever. Donovan's lies, his doctored report, his social media smears had tried to bury her, but today she'd rip his mask off in front of the world. Carter's voice cut like a blade. "Ms. Jenkins, present your evidence, now!" Loretta stepped forward, her chin high, her gaze drilling into Donovan. "Your Honor, this video proves I never resisted. Officer Donovan targeted me, shoved me, cuffed me for being black." The prosecutor lunged, voice shrill. "Objection! That's speculation." But Carter's glare silenced him. Overruled. Play the footage. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy truth. Loretta, exhausted from her ER shift, pausing on the sidewalk. Donovan barking, shoving her against his car, her hands raised in compliance. Gasps erupted from the crowd, a woman shouting, "That's our nurse!" The room shook with outrage. The raw wound of racial profiling laid bare for all to see. Loretta's fists tightened, her nails biting into her palms as Donovan squirmed, his face reddening. She pressed forward, voice steady as steel. "I've saved lives in this city for decades, cops, kids, elders, but to him I was just a target." She slapped down her Jenkins Health Fund records, pages spilling proof of her secret work, funding chemo for the poor, insulin for kids, surgeries for the forgotten. The crowd roared, their cheers a tidal wave. Carter's eyes widened, scanning the documents, his jaw tightening as he turned to Donovan. "You falsified a report to ruin a woman who's done more for Detroit than you ever will. Explain yourself. Now." Donovan stammered, his voice cracking. She was uncooperative. I was doing my job." But the footage played again, looping his aggression, his lies crumbling like sand. Loretta's chest swelled, not with pride, but with power. She'd turned his weapon against him. The prosecutor tried to interrupt, but Carter cut him off. "Enough. This court won't tolerate corruption." He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Officer Donovan, you're suspended pending investigation, and you'll apologize publicly." The gallery exploded, fists pumping, as Donovan's head bowed, his career in ashes. Loretta's eyes burned, not with tears, but with triumph, the weight of every slur, every stop, lifting at last. The press swarmed outside, cameras flashing as Loretta stepped into the sunlight, Maya at her side. Donovan, flanked by his own department, muttered a forced apology, his voice barely audible over the crowd's chants. Justice for Loretta. Her lawyer handed Carter a petition, signed by hundreds, patients, nurses, neighbors, demanding police reform. Carter nodded, his face grim but resolute. "This court supports Ms. Jenkins' fund to train officers. No more Donovans." The crowd roared louder, their voices echoing the protests of 2020. The pain of every black American who'd faced a badge and lived to tell. Loretta stood tall, her scrubs wrinkled, but her spirit unbroken. She'd exposed Donovan's lies, not just for herself, but for every woman who'd been profiled, every voice silenced. Her fund's mission, now public, would reshape Detroit's streets, one officer at a time. As Carter banged the gavel to close the case, his eyes met hers, a silent vow to carry her fight forward. She gripped Maya's hand, her heart a drumbeat of victory, ready to face the world not as a victim, but as a force that had shattered a system's chains. "Keep fighting, Loretta!" The shout rang out from a crowd outside Detroit Community Hospital, where Loretta Jenkins stood in her nurse's scrubs, her hands steady as she adjusted an IV for a young patient, a cop's son, barely clinging to life after a shooting. Her heart pounded, not with fear but with purpose, as she glanced out the window at the sea of faces, black, white, young, old, all chanting her name. Weeks after her courtroom victory, where she'd exposed Officer Donovan's lies and forced his public apology, Loretta was no longer just a nurse. She was a symbol, a spark that had ignited Detroit's fight against the systemic hate that had cuffed her for walking home. Her jaw tightened, not in anger now, but in resolve. She'd turned pain into power, and she wasn't done. Inside, the ER buzzed with its usual chaos, but the air felt different. Nurses who'd once whispered about her now slapped her shoulder, their eyes gleaming with pride. "You showed 'em, Loretta," one said, handing her a chart. She nodded, her lips a tight line, but her chest swelled. The Jenkins Health Fund, once her quiet secret, was now a citywide force, its mission to fund medical care and train cops to see people, not profiles, splashed across headlines. Her fingers brushed the pocket where she'd kept that hospital letter, the one tying her to Judge Carter's life 15 years ago. It wasn't just a memento now. It was a torch, lighting the way for a city battered by division. Maya burst into the ward, her teacher's energy electric as she waved a tablet. "Mom, the petition hit 10,000 signatures. Carter's pushing your training program citywide." Loretta's breath caught, her eyes locking on her daughter's. The program, her demand in court, was real now. Workshops to teach officers about bias, led by Black nurses, activists, and survivors like her. It wasn't just reform, it was revolution, rooted in the protests of 2020 that her generation had marched in, their signs demanding justice still vivid in her mind. She'd turned her arrest, her humiliation, into a weapon to reshape Detroit's streets, one badge at a time. Outside, Judge Carter arrived, his suit crisp but his face softer than in court. He caught her eye through the glass, nodding as he joined the crowd, now holding signs, "Loretta's Legacy." He stepped to a makeshift podium, his voice steady. "Ms. Jenkins didn't just save my life, she's saving this city. Her fund will train our police to serve, not oppress." The crowd roared, fists raised, their cheers a balm to the wounds of every Black American who'd faced a flashlight or a gun for no reason. Loretta's nails dug into her palms, not from rage but from a fierce pride. She'd done this, not for applause, but for the kid in her care, for Maya, for every soul who'd felt invisible. She stepped outside, the crowd parting as she approached Carter. "This isn't about me," she said, voice cutting through the noise. "It's about value, what we do when no one's watching." Her words echoed her courtroom stand, now a rallying cry. A young Black girl in the crowd clutched her mother, whispering, "She's like us." Loretta's eyes stung, but she blinked it back, her spine straight as steel. This was her legacy, not just exposing Donovan, but building a future where no one else would be cuffed for their skin. As the sun set, painting Detroit's skyline gold, Loretta returned to the ER, her hands guiding a needle with the same precision she'd used to dismantle a system. Carter's voice lingered in the air, promising to expand her program statewide. Maya hugged her, whispering, "You're unstoppable, Mom." Loretta's lips curved, a rare smile breaking through. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a force, her worth undeniable, her fight a beacon. The city pulsed with change, and she was its heart, beating strong.